welcome to this WPO podcast with myself, Andrew Marr. Today we are looking at raising awareness in relation to veterans returning to both civilian and to corporate life after being in service. On this call today with me, I have James Sussex, our clinical team lead in the UK, and Jacqueline Hall, also a clinical lead in the UK. Both of them work on the clinical team. I'll pass it over to James to introduce himself a little bit for a little bit of context.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So it's really good to be here today, talking with you guys. I'm clinical team lead in the UK for our company, but I was in the army between the ages of 17 and 22, and I left the army back in 2013. I've sort of been involved in a few different things, sort of here and there over the last sort of 8 to 10 years, but that was my sort of main experience really, and the reason why I sort of came into the job I'm in at the moment.
Okay, thanks, James, for that. And Jacqueline, if you'd like to give us a little bit of your background.
Yes, so thank you so much for inviting me here today. My background is actually with the Royal Air Force, and I was in the Royal Air Force between my mid-20s to mid-30s. I actually went into the Royal Air Force already as a qualified registered nurse for mental health, and so have stayed in that field. But then since leaving the Royal Air Force, I have been involved with uniformed services, probably pretty much my entire career in one way or another. So, and then came to Workplace Options, where I sit within a corporate client on site. I provide one-to-one counselling, but also consultation to the client themselves on their mental health strategy.
Okay, thanks very much. So, James, if you'd like to kind of give us an idea of your own experience of what it was like leaving the services.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I found it quite difficult actually initially. I mean, I'd sort of gone from a place of, I was 17 and sort of left home quite abruptly at the time, and that was my first sort of venture away from home. And for the next sort of few years, it became sort of home for me. I got used to moving around and being in different places all the time, not necessarily inside the country either. So, it was quite difficult in terms of leaving. I think I had quite not an identity sort of crisis per se, but I remember the moment that I left quite specifically. We sort of had to de-kit and hand all of my stuff back, and then sort of leaving without my identity card, and sort of I had my car packed up and ready to sort of move, into a new civilian life, and I just had a sense of, what have I done? This is a huge mistake. And then it was a sense of anxiety. I felt quite alone actually, sort of leaving on that day and literally driving to another city and moving into a house share that I'd organised sort of privately. So it was very daunting. I remember I felt quite alone during that time period. It didn't feel quite real. There was a bit of an unreality to the situation. And it's sort of, I'd left because I was pretty sure of the road that I sort of needed to take. So I had a place on a degree. I had some potential work lined up, and sort of making sure all of that was in place. And, I had tried to clarify whether or not I could continue with my training whilst I was in the services, and that was proving quite difficult. It wasn't something that the Army was sort of supporting at the time, so I had to make the tough choice to come out and do the degree. I didn't have a degree before, having sort of left straight after school. And essentially it was, although there was a year's sort of notice period, it was quite abrupt, and it was quite an adjustment afterwards. I had a very difficult time adjusting to finances. I realised very quickly I was going to have to sell my car in order to survive. I was working a temp job, and I was losing quite a lot of money, and I hadn't expected that. I hadn't really thought about how much rent was going to be, or how much food shopping was going to be, because all of that was done for me. And obviously, as a young man, that was ideal, but perhaps sort of felt that I didn't really appreciate that at the time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it sounds, the way you phrase it there, that it was a tough choice to leave, and maybe there's a part of you wanted to continue on if you could match up the education. So you had kind of planned to leave and follow this path, but in that you had to face all these challenges. So is there a part of you that might have stayed in the services if they could have accommodated the educational piece? Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, many times over the last 8 years, I've sort of caught myself saying, I'm going to go back. There were a couple of times a few years ago I tried to go back, and and it was, there's always been this sense of, if I don't make it out here, then this has all been for nothing. Right. So it was a real all or nothing approach to, and it was everything. I had to make sure I was getting the same salary, had to make sure that I felt sort of satisfied. But yeah, absolutely. To this day, I miss the job, 100%. Yeah.
Okay, Jacqueline, I heard you coming in there. Did you want to ask James something there? Was it?
It was just really interesting to notice with James, James, how as soon as you came out, there was that real concern there about the differences seem to really hit you in the face almost. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Although there was a year to prepare, it was, nothing really sort of prepared me for a D-Day, if that makes sense, and saying goodbye to the team, and that was it. All of a sudden, I was outside the wire, and it was quite alienating. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And Jackie, does any of that resonate with your own experience, or what was your own experience of leaving the services?
Mine was slightly different, but there were some commonalities. The reason that I wanted to leave was I'd really established myself in a location, and I didn't want to get up and move again, or be told that I was going to be posted somewhere else. And it was time for me that I felt that I needed a little bit more consistency in my life. So when I left, actually, I was quite excited about it and thinking about all the things that I could do, and but interestingly, when I did leave, a bit like James was saying, you realise how much you're leaving. It's not, we say this a lot, isn't it? It's, your job is not who you are, but actually with the military, it pretty much is, because you live it, you breathe it, it's not just working with it, it's a whole way of life. And I think I underestimated how much I was leaving. So I already had a job established, and I had probably a bit of a smoother ride than James, because I went into something that felt familiar, but as a civilian. So I started immediately working as a civilian with the police service. So the uniformed approach was comforting in a way, I guess. But that sense of suddenly not having that team around you and being autonomous almost, because from day one when you go into the services, you are a team. The whole ethos is about team. And whilst there is an awful lot of that externally within the corporate world and other areas, other industries, it's not as pronounced. You don't all start together in a group and continue with that. Everything you do, you notice the impact on another by your response. And of course, these days we work so separate to each other. So you might have a colleague that's based in another area, so you don't see the impact of what your actions mean to somebody else. Whereas in the military, you always get that awareness of, how you respond within a team, what impact it has.
And, since leaving, I mean, how difficult or easy was that adjustment for you, Jackie? You talk about moving to another uniform service, so that kind of softened the blow a little bit. But how easy or difficult was it overall?
I think that because I already was established and I lived externally, that was a little easier. I think it was my surprise. I expected it to be easier than it was. And I think that's it. There is also, I think for some people that, I'm going to start a new chapter of my life, and I will be able to make decisions about how that runs. But you underestimate how much of the service that is sort of you're immersed in it in a good way, in a positive way. You care about it very much, and you care about how everything runs. You want to be a part of it. You're completely engaged in it. So suddenly, I think for me, the shock came on how much of an impact it had negatively to begin with. That adjustment period, I expected it to be much smoother and much more exciting, and I felt very unsettled by it. And I think that working with the police service softened that. But even then, I kept comparing. I spent a long time comparing between what I was doing and what I had been doing, more so than I think if I'd have changed a job.
Yeah. Oh, very interesting. Thanks for that, Jackie. And James, the same kind of idea or question to yourself. What was easy or difficult about the adjustment? I know you've shared some pieces already, but as you kind of realized you weren't going back and you formed this new path, what were the challenges that you faced?
I think very similar to Jackie, really. There, my expectation was that I've got all these things lined up and I'm ready to go. I'm sure of myself, and actually, then it was quite a difficult transition afterwards. So it was the expectations sort of didn't meet the reality in sort of coming out, and it was sort of like, what was easy about that was the mindset. I carried a mindset with me afterwards that was do or die. That's it. Let's keep going, push forward at all costs. Not necessarily knowing what I was going into, but just keep moving forward and you're going to be fine. And actually that was quite easy to adopt that. What was difficult was moments where I sort of paused and thought, is this going the way that it should be going, or have I made a huge mistake? And what was very difficult, in particular with the transition, and it's funny because X years have gone by, 8 or 10 years have gone by now, and I still see myself as being in that transition. But it was particularly difficult when I hit the amount of years out of the army that I was serving for. So when it got to 5 years after the discharge date, so around about 2017, 2018, I found that incredibly difficult. That notion of I've now been outside longer, or about to tip into longer than I was actually in for, and that was quite a difficult moment for me. And actually, it was very difficult to sort of get my ducks in a row. It took a few years to get back to the same salary, and that was a promise that I sort of made to myself, was that I'll never step back in terms of salary, have to keep getting those increments and pushing forward in order to match the salary that I was on. It was all about trying to reconnect with other family members, with friends again, and it seemed like everything had changed. I sort of when I got back out here, it was the relationships have changed, and the nature of being out here had changed. People I was working with didn't want to work until the job was finished, and parts like that didn't quite marry up. And I'd spend some days early on. I'd spend some days in the workplace or at home or wherever, feeling quite frustrated.
Yes.
And even cross about not even knowing what I was cross about, and I noticed that I was almost deliberately putting things in my way that were huge obstacles. Right. When I first got out, I took great pride in my physical condition and other things like that. And, I was cycling a 20-mile round trip to work, do a day at work, come back, and, almost making things deliberately sort of pressurized for myself in a way. And I've realized through the therapeutic work I've done that is very much about not being able to let go of the whole piece, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and it sounds like there was that real poignant moment of 5 years out. And how did you manage that realization? Is that the kind of turning point for you, James, where you realized there's no way back and this is the new life, or is there still a piece of that going on for you?
I would say there's still a piece of that going on, but it's on the other side of it now. And I think, ultimately, it was quite difficult. Like I say, there were a few times when I went back to the recruiting office. I knew that there was always a lifeline there for me, in the sense of I could go back and step back into the role within X years. So by the time it was approaching that sort of 4 or 5 year sort of I've been out now, I was starting to realize that I'm getting older, and that actually, I've been out for some time. I won't be able to just step back into it now, and that was fast approaching. And actually, I did a few times go to the recruitment office and ask about going back in. The tough days that I would have out here, I would think, right, I'm going back. That's it. I'm done. I've made a mistake here. And it was a real process that at times it felt a lot like turmoil, if that makes sense. And actually, it's not so much like that now, but I do still recognize moments when I am in that frame of mind.
Yeah, and I mean, if I was just to follow on from that, I mean, what have you taken forward then since leaving? Kind of like what kind of values or ethos, or what remnants of your military experience have you brought forward into this life now? The corporate world, the civilian world.
I think I have brought values. When we were saying there at the start, Jackie was saying at the start there about values and how different values can be outside, and the values in the army are not just, and in the uniform services are not just a set of values that we write on paper. They're drilled into you and drummed into you, physically, emotionally, everything, the whole piece, and it becomes your whole sort of MO for how you do life, in a sense, and it's courage and discipline and integrity. These things they're not taken lightly, and actually, I remember many lessons where that was sort of drilled into us. We had many lessons about values and standards, and and how a soldier should be, and actually, when we got to training, one of the first things that was told to us was, that's it now, we've got to break down the civilian and we've got to build up the soldier. But there wasn't a sort of decompression on the other side. There wasn't a similar sort of training or detraining on the other side of that. So I think I brought those forward. I think I brought them forward in a way that was maybe too relentless, perhaps. And I found that I was putting a lot of energy and a lot of drive into things and not getting similar in return. And actually, that became quite tiring for me. So I had to learn to calibrate, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it sounds like it's been a challenge. And, if I was to throw the same question over to yourself, Jackie, about, what have you brought forward since leaving the uniformed services?
Yeah. Well, I sort of tried to find a way back to the services after several years, actually. Like James, I couldn't quite let go. And I went back and worked with the Soldier, Sailor and Air Force Association, SAFA. And I was posted over to Germany and spent almost 4 years working with the Army over there. I needed to almost get that familiarity again, and I can almost remember almost a sense of relief when I was actually accepted for that job, and again just experiencing those shared values and those shared goals that comes with it. When I left there and came back to the UK, I worked with the NHS, and those getting the job done, those kind of things that James talked about, I found that again, whilst there is that part of the NHS that does exist, but there is also that very slow bureaucracy side of it that sometimes prevents you taking an action. And I can remember working very, very late one night, getting a whole department moved to another office and doing it myself, not getting the porters in or anybody, because you had to put in paperwork and it was very slow and cumbersome, and upsetting a lot of people by doing that. So it's quite a difficult balance sometimes, because it really is a case, if there's a job that needs doing, get it done. And I think that most people in almost all walks of life would agree, yeah, absolutely, that's that's right. But I found the process is far, far slower and struggled with that. And I guess the other interesting thing I picked up while James was talking is he was talking about those values and, that experience of being in the service. I reconnected as he was talking about it again. Nice. It really it was really powerful. And and it took me right back into it again. And that real sense of it, I completely connected with James there as we are vets, which was really interesting. I wasn't expecting that at all. I think it stays with you. I don't think you ever leave it completely. I think it stays with you, but you do have to find a way to adapt. You can't live that way outside of the military to that extent, but you can hold those sense of integrity, that shared teamwork. The one thing I now know about me is I function best within a team. So there are things that you learn about yourself as well that you can adapt and you can work with, but you do get some hiccups along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thanks for sharing that, Jackie, especially the piece about the powerful connection and, that it's always there. And even for yourself, it's bubbling up there. And I mean, if I was just to look at, James touched off relationships earlier on, and I'm wondering how relationships have been managed or impacted, whether that's going into service, returning from service, or how you both kind of manage that. If I could stay with you, Jackie, first to explore that, and then I'll pass it over to James after.
I think relationships within the service are transient. They're very powerful when they're there. So, you can, because you integrate with families, and spouses are very much a part of that whole military way of life, but there is always an understanding that you're going to get posted. So a lot of the time people will say we stay in touch, and a lot of the time they don't, but if they meet again, it's an immediate connection. So because there is that shared understanding, yes, we're working together right now, we know each other socially, this is really good. But then as soon as you're posted again, we know that's going to happen. So it's okay to let that go, knowing that if you meet again, the relationship will be just as strong. Personal relationships can suffer. They can be difficult because of the demands of the job, and like James was saying, you work until you get a job done, and that can be extremely telling on the family and the spouses. Of course, there's an expectation from them as well,
Yes.
and that can be really difficult for them. They didn't sign up in the same way. So there is a huge expectation on them. And I used to work as a mental health nurse. I used to work a lot with the partners
Yes.
of serving personnel who were struggling with that transition too.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jackie. Thanks for sharing that. The thing that resonates for me there as you were talking is that shared understanding, but it sounds like it's just this really deeper connection to
Yes.
It's even beyond understanding. It's just a deeper connection that nearly never breaks. That's the way I'm hearing it as a civilian myself.
Mm.
But James, would you have similar experiences to what Jackie shared there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You stay connected. It doesn't matter how much time has gone by. I won't go into too much detail here, but I've spent some time helping out with things around the Ukraine crisis,
Mm-hmm.
and reconnected with people that I haven't spoken to for 8 years.
Yeah.
And it was a no-brainer. There's no question or there's no doubt. It's, yeah, I'll jump right in with you. No problem. And whatever way things go. And it's sort of like, you can have a sort of 3-4 year break, and, all of a sudden somebody's in trouble, or you see it on Facebook, old friends on Facebook or whatever. And,
Yes.
all of a sudden you're getting the old names back together and everybody's talking again, and then away. And it's, it's a different type of relationship. It's one of, sort of really strong sort of respect, I would say, and one of, not necessarily sort of, it's like family in a way, in a way
Yes.
that it can be much more than whatever your biological family looks like, if that makes sense. And that's powerful. That's really powerful. And I remember going home on leave, being 18, 19, 20, and going home on leave and feeling a bit out of place, because I missed those relationships that we're building, and the collegial relationships that were equally friendships, that were equally family relationships, but in every sense of the word, really. And that made it tough trying to
Yes.
reconnect and connect to family members. I think pretty much at that time, all of my civilian friends kind of dropped off. I mean, we were sort of, I was going through a formative time anyway, being 17, 18, all the way up to 22. But, all of those relationships kind of dropped off, and then sort of, where my sort of folks lived, it was a very much a slower pace of life. And it was not for me. And I ended up sort of being in Canada for a long time. And reconnecting after that was very difficult, actually. And I think, I wasn't particularly very open about the experiences there. And I suppose in a way, I just sort of felt a little bit like an outsider, if that makes sense, coming back from all of that.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that, James. And I suppose just one final question for me, James, to you is I'm wondering, what's it been like since then? Have you been able to build similar relationships on the outside? Is that a slow process? Is that challenging, or how is that for you?
It can be challenging. Yeah, it can be challenging. You're sort of I'm looking for that sort of that strong relationship that is not unbreakable, but is very sort of staunch, very tough, very hard to break. And that sort of that humor, that dark humor as well, I think is a really big part of the job. But actually, doing the right thing on a difficult day, that's how, that's the main thing that I've taken with me. And people that are going to have you back, and I suppose,
Yes.
what I've found difficult there, and something I've had to really work on, is coming out and my back's against the wall, and having to sort of change expectations. I realised it wasn't fair for me to expect and demand sort of highly of other people, and but I will say, equally, the friends that I've made in civilian life, most of them are veterans. So,
Yes.
People that I didn't meet in the service but have met afterwards, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay, so still a connection in a way.
Yeah.
So listen, James and Jackie, we're going to have to wrap it up in a moment, but I really want to thank you both for being so, open here today and sharing your own stories and connecting with each other. And it's something that's very important, and it's something that I hope that we'll continue on here at WPO, and we'll look at, doing some future events in, 2023 with maybe some trainings and that we'll be involved in. But before we wrap up, any final thoughts, comments, or words from yourself, Jackie?
Well, I think that, the values and the way of life within the service have really helped me also to adapt to civilian life and corporate life. I think that you can adapt. They don't have to remain. You don't have to act on them in the same way, but they hold firm no matter where you are. And I think when people see that you are committed or engaged with, whether it's relationships or whether it's within an organisation, I think that is really appreciated. So as long as I recognise that I'm still living the same kind of values, but I'm using them in a slightly different way, and that's appreciated, I think it's the way forward for me.
Yeah, I love that, Jackie, that hold firm no matter where you are. I think that's it. That sums it up beautifully for me. And James, any final thoughts, words, or comments that you'd like to make?
No, I think it's really important that we're recognising this, and I think particularly around this time. But it's interesting, you find people that have been in uniform services of some kind in all sort of walks of life, and actually I think something like this is going to be really useful for maybe identifying some experiences, but also for getting the sort of conversation started, if that makes sense. So I think it's really lovely that we're doing this at this time.
Yeah, thanks, James. Thanks, Jackie. Thanks for your time today. It was wonderful to facilitate or be involved in that conversation, and maybe we can do something again another time. Take care, all.
Thank you.